Another thing is that I come from the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, or the End of the World, at Cambridge University, and many of us, well, we are all looking at the intersections between all the different catastrophic risks that we face as a species and as a planet, and how they all link together. And it has been uh, fascinating the last few years to be involved in that work because my focus has largely been on great power conflict, particularly around nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament. And to reflect on this bigger scale of challenge and the um, sensation that I feel deep down that there's a certain inevitability to the catastrophes that arise gives me both um, a great deal of fear and a great deal of hope. And you might ask, where does this hope come from? I think it comes from an awareness that there are forces here at play that are bigger than us, and that it is recognizing and getting in touch with those parts that are greater than ourselves that I think those of us from faiths um, have some responses that are deeply relevant and that are really important in this time as things feel very dark. And I'll come back to that theme later on, um, along with a number of different messages I want to convey around my personal journey through this challenge, which has led me away from a place of simplistic clarity, good versus bad, light versus dark, my sense of righteousness, my sense of wanting to change the world in my own image, and a lot of the hubris that I think I had that I see in politics more generally, and that we as people of faith have a lot to bring here, not so much in terms of rules or commandments or particular messages from our own faith, but rather in terms of process and in emphasizing relationship and compassion, in bringing a sense of openness rather than closed assurance, and a sense of humility as individuals and groups when we mix with others. And those are the themes that I would like to bring before concluding around some of the things that I think we can bring in our interfaith work internationally. So, so where should I start? I started as very much an activist. I was breaking into Air Force bases and planting flowers beside the runway. I was organising significant demonstrations. I was on the Stop the War Coalition steering group organising the 2003 demonstration against the Iraq War, representing the Green Party. Um, I I felt a clarity and a sense of the position that we have, and that clarity has shifted, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the clarity that George Bush and Tony Blair were coming together, the forces of imperialism, colonialism, the sense that the same intuitive relationship with that part of the world, with the Middle East, was driving us into thinking that we could impose our will upon others, that this was going to come at great human cost. And of course, of course we were right. We were right, but just because we were right does not necessarily mean that we were right in our hearts. And and I, at the time, I remember talking to one of the Prime Minister's closest political advisors because my wife was in the Prime Minister's policy unit at the time, whilst I was running the protests against, and so I had this perspective that straddled both sides, if you like, and um, talking to that advisor just literally days before the outbreak of the war, I got this sense of a mirror between us where he had clarity about why they were going to war, and I had clarity about why they should not. And in our very open and frank exchange, um, I came to see aspects of myself in the other, and it enabled me to communicate with him in a way that was much more open than I had been able to before. And whilst I don't think it had any significant impact on his opinion at that moment, I think he could sense the sense of openness in me and the desire to understand his perspective and to interrogate that exploration of how we can move forward constructively that really sat with me very clearly. And and I remember it. I took it away as a strong memory. And a few years later, when I was teaching systems thinking to the top management program in the National School of Government. I was teaching these uh, these tools for dealing with complexity to very senior government officials, and one of them came up to me and said he thought the tools were extraordinary and the mindset was very helpful and the way in which we were encouraging them to take a bigger picture view and to have greater compassion for the variety of perspectives and stakeholders in any system. uh, they really were taking this on. He was taking it on. He was very excited, and he came up to me and he said, how do you apply this in your life as a politician?" And and I looked at him, and my memory went back to that moment with the special advisor, and I said to him, I said I don't. I realize that I teach you lot this stuff, but I don't practice it myself. And the sense of um, shame was really powerful and quite transformative for me. It reminded me of the cockcrow, Peter and the cockcrow moment, um, where where you're confronted with your double standards and your lack of courage, and uh, and I resolved from that moment to explore how I could transform my activity from one of a model that I would describe. I come from a Quaker tradition, and we have the idea, the practice of discerning uh, in our community, sitting in silence and attempting to discern the will of God and exploring, inching towards some kind of resolution, and then going out in the world from that place of discernment. And and I realize that model's wrong. It doesn't work because what it does is it creates a a sense of righteousness and um, a sense of block in terms of connection with others who have different approaches or who may not have discerned the same thing or who were or who are coming at this from a completely different angle. And I realized that actually each and every moment that I am conscious and in um, in strong intention to do the right thing and to be connected to the best I can with the divine is a moment of discernment. And so when I am in dialogue with a special advisor or with the commander of a nuclear submarine or with the head of the British nuclear weapons system, the rear admiral that became quite a close friend, even though we saw these things from a very different perspective. Each of those moments is a moment of discernment, and the other is a child of God. In fact, when they say things that I feel deeply disconnected to, that is itself a message and part of the discernment that I experience and has just as much value as the moments I have in silence with my own community, and that this discernment is continuous. Um, and I came to recognize that those times I have with people who experience the world very differently from me, from who have a different ideology, who have a different framing or different culture, have so much to give in this process of exploration, and that it is that process of exploration that is the essence of how we move from this very divided, divisive world that is driven by greed and hatred and fear more than anything, towards a world of greater openness and communion with one another and with the divine. So I wanted to describe a few other experiences to give some color to what I'm saying. I was invited about 18 months ago to speak in Moscow at the Moscow Non-Proliferation Conference, which was no mean challenge because I was the only person from the Anglosphere. There were no Americans, no British. There were a very, very small number of Europeans. The journey there was treacherous. The time I was in Moscow airport being interviewed um, reached around 8 or 9 hours. It was a challenge, and I did experience a lot of people here who were very critical of me in talking with the Russians. But as a result, I was at the podium in front of several hundred, maybe 600 people, many of whom were Russian officials from the Defense Ministry, the Foreign Ministry. There were North Koreans, Chinese, and I was there invited to speak on the Middle East and a zone free of weapons of mass destruction, which is one of the projects I work on. And I had a very technical presentation in front of me, and I stood up and I looked out at the audience, and I realized that the technical presentation was not what I needed to give. That was the safe option, but it wasn't the option that I had flown halfway across the world through difficult circumstances to deliver. So I put that down and I spoke from the heart about my shame, about the shame I felt coming from a country that was largely responsible for the mess in the Middle East historically, that had in very recent years contributed further to that mess, and that the colonialist mindset was alive and well within the UK. Now, of course, you might imagine this went down rather well with that audience. And as they heard me saying this, I could feel the room open up. And it wasn't that I was playing the room. I was speaking very much from this sense of the sense of the contribution that our country has made to the mess. And and then I said, um, we need your help. We need your help to overcome these addictions to colonialism and the fear that we experience when we see other rising powers. And I sense the same here in Moscow. I sense that you too suffer from this addiction, that you too have the fear, and that we need to help one another overcome these addictions and these fears. And they were able to hear that, as far as I could tell, because I had opened myself up first. And for me, that is the power of turning the other cheek. It's not, it's not in order to be a victim. It's rather to open ourselves up and to be vulnerable, because it is through vulnerability that we build community. And the only hope that our species has to move through here is to exercise vulnerability. And I think as Christians, we have particular powerful message there around vulnerability that is mirrored in many other faiths. I had a small group of young Russian officials from the foreign ministry come up to me afterwards and say, that was very powerful. Do you think we should be working from the inside or the outside of the ministry? And every time I tell that story, I feel huge emotion because I felt their vulnerability in coming up to me and saying that. And it really reinforced for me the power of vulnerability. Just to complete the story, my response was that it wasn't for me to tell them, but that if they were to stay inside, they needed to have people outside to act as a sounding board and a community to be vulnerable to. Um, I'm far, far from sorted on all of this. This is not something that comes easy to me. I'm in the middle of a divorce process, quite near the end, and it's been tough. I have felt all sorts of emotions in that process. I have not always acted um, with the clarity and the positive intent. The emotions have been strong, um, and I have had to engage in challenging exercises of forgiveness and compassion. And I have reached new depths of understanding of just how challenging forgiveness can be. But I have also come to value that process because it has given me a better understanding of how people can get drawn in and trapped in their feelings of righteousness and their failure to forgive, and the many other traps that we can fall into as humans. That the engagements that I'm talking about and the relationship with the divine is a continuous challenge. And I'm bringing it now in relation to my work with China because I'm drawn into that process very recently. The relationship that we have with China, I think, is one built on misunderstanding, on fear, on systemic transformation, which I think is possibly one of the biggest challenges of our time. One of the things that links all these global catastrophic risks that we study in Cambridge is the failure that we have been witnessing in global governance, one that has, of course, been exacerbated by the new President of the United States, but actually has been a trend for many years. And and I see a huge vacuum at the center. And I perceive China seeing this as an opportunity. And there are really significant challenges here. Um, the Chinese government is uh, far from easy in terms of dealings with it. Their practices in China are very challenging for us. If there are countries in the world that are very different from us in terms of ideology, China could hardly be further. Its willingness to use strong surveillance, its human rights abuses, not only in parts of China, but across the whole of China, and its control, its threat to Taiwan, its engagement with neighboring states in a rather domineering way. Uh, and of course, increasingly, its engagement with ourselves in ways that we feel threat, as we have been seeing this last week. But again, as I was in China a few weeks ago, I'm going back in 2 weeks. Uh, as as I was engaging in the dialogues with Chinese, both officials and civil society, it became really clear to me that we only see half the picture. That if we were to take Taiwan, for example, the Chinese see Taiwan as part of China, and there is a reason for that, going back to the history of Taiwan and the civil war that has not been concluded, and the sense of identity. And as people from a country that has a politics that is deeply divided by identity, sexual identity, political identity, uh, um, class identity, we should understand the strength of what happens when people attach their identity to certain ideas. And it is if we can engage with respect and understand that the relationship that we have is one where our perspective is really important and holds value because it is our perspective and we are inside the system where perspectives need to be respected, but we also need to respect others' perspectives and to engage with their feelings and with their sense of identity with a sense of understanding in fluid relationship, then we have a chance of making connection. And the beauty of this, of course, is also that the possibilities of their change also expands. So how does this relate to the interfaith work? Um, My perception is that for a number of reasons, some of my beliefs are quite controversial and radical in this respect, but they do have something to do with the Ukraine war. But there are plenty of other reasons, including the unsustainable lifestyles that we have been living for the last few decades and even centuries. The cohesion, political cohesion within Europe is fraying very quickly. And we are seeing the rise of the far right that plays on people's fears and people's sense of fracture within society and their desire to belong. It's this sense of identity again. And I believe that this comes at root from a universal human desire to be part of something greater than oneself. And our culture, our society has, for the last few hundred years, since the Enlightenment, been strongly based on an individualist narrative of freedom and separation and claiming of human rights. And there are powerful, positive dimensions to this, but there are also deep challenges and problems. And this atomization of our society, that manifests itself in our economic system and the message that the meaning of life is essentially to be selfish and to look after yourself. And if everybody does this, then the world gets on somehow. I think that that message is broken, and I think people have always felt alienated from that message, even whilst they're attracted to it. And I'm not about to uh, give, give you a defense of communism or indeed any alternative political ideology. This is not what this is about. It's about going deeper than any ideology. It's about building relationship. And I think as faith groups, where we recognize the relationship that we have with something bigger than ourselves, using whatever words that we want to use, be it God or the divine, and that that relationship that we have with the greater thing, with God, is incredibly powerful as a message, as a symbol, even to those that don't share the same faith that we have, that this is actually the craving that people are seeking when they get attracted to the flag waving protests and the anti-migrant protests, and when they feel safer because somebody or a group of people in Whitehall or Westminster have the ultimate weapon that protects them under the umbrella of security. And the sense of relationship as they listen to the radio and hear their politicians or hear the debates, the sense of connection with the nation state as something that's bigger than themselves, the urge to put a cross beside the reform candidate as a protest against those that are seen as somehow uh, unfaithful to the national psyche, or um, the the sense of anger towards the other as they invade our society. These are all urges to be part of something greater. And if we can come together with a variety of faiths, not simply to bury the hatchet of confrontation between ourselves as faiths, but rather to celebrate the relationship that we have with this, with the thing that is greater than ourselves, the thing that draws us into compassion, vulnerability, and humility, and that draws us into relationship with one another. I think we begin to come up with the answer that is lacking in politics today. And it becomes something incredibly powerful as a social, religious political engagement.